I was a prayer warrior because I was so sure that this is something that God was going to fix. And if I was the best Christian around, like if I was the kid that even the other kids at school looked to be the Christian, like I was the model of that, then for sure he was going to come to my aid.
Hello and welcome to Out Loud. Out Loud is a podcast by and for queer people of faith in the South. Here we tell our stories of varied religious upbringings, messy coming outs, and the gift of community with one another. I'm your host, Greg Thompson, and the voice you just heard was Cody Belew. Cody is a singer-songwriter here in Nashville, living into his identity as a gay man while making country music. You might recognize his name from the third season of The Voice, and he is now working on his first full-length album. Cody was raised Southern Baptist and identifies as gay. Together, we talk about growing up and praying not to be gay, and how he eventually came out to his parents. Cody's found his own way to be spiritual outside of going to church, identifying as a spiritual being having a human experience, which is a phrase coined by the French philosopher and Jesuit Pierres Teilhard de Chardin. We also discuss Cody's songwriting, where he channels his own experiences and the experiences of those around him. But before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you're new to listening, Out Loud is a show that runs completely on the generosity of our fans. If you love what you hear on today's show, consider supporting us over on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Just visit patreon.com/outloudstories to get started. And we are not alone in the pursuit of sharing queer stories of faith. Our friends at the Forbidden Apple podcast would like to share a quick word.
Have you been told you cannot be LGBTQ and spiritual?
The Forbidden Apple podcast is a space that gives voice to queer individuals to reclaim their spirituality.
Whatever that means to you.
Come find us over at the Forbidden Apple podcast. I am Melissa Weiss, and I grew up in an ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jewish home, which was very, very religious.
I am Pelayo Alvarez, and I grew up back in Spain, also in a very religious Catholic environment.
And now we explore what spirituality means to us as out and proud queer individuals.
Come join us on all streaming platforms.
Be sure to check them out, and now let's get into our conversation with Cody Belew. Thank you for coming on the show, Cody. It's great to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. So I want to start with a question that we ask most folks these days is, how would you characterize the religious background of your childhood?
Without offending my mother, we were, I would say, loose practicing Baptists. So we weren't like every Sunday and Wednesday kind of family, but there were big spells where we were there religiously. And then as I got older and youth group started to become a thing to do, I for sure was going to Wednesday night youth and all of that. So my religious, like organized religion journey started in Southern Baptist world and migrated to Methodist. And then I worked in the Catholic Church for a while, and here we are.
Like, how would you have described church when you were a kid growing up and going to a Southern Baptist congregation?
Well, I liked it. It had, a version of live music. This was before it was really cool to have, bass, drums, guitar in all church. We were still rocking the organ and the piano with the menagerie of voices in the choir. You didn't have to audition. Anybody could be in it, which was probably not the best idea. But I just remember it being exciting for me as a little kid because of the theatrics of it. Our Southern Baptist preacher was very good at the delivery of it in that great Baptist way, with the booming voice and the cadence, and waving the Bible around, then slamming it down and turning your Bibles to this page and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I liked that. And I also liked Sunday school because I liked that we did crafts, and I liked school, and I liked being a good student. So that all resonated with me. And this has never changed about me, but I am very much into, toeing the line. So if you're supposed to do something to get something, I'm all about that and following those rules. And the basis of Christianity for me, from a kid's point of view, of if you believe in Jesus, you go to heaven and all these things. So I was really into the idea of, being rewarded at the end of all this. And I wanted to do a good job. If God was always watching, I wanted to make him proud, just the same way Santa Claus was always watching. So I was not going to be the kid to screw that up. But I do remember when it started to register to me that the preacher was talking about certain things that now for the first time were specifically about me. Like the best way for me to explain that is like second grade, we're watching Beauty and the Beast, the Disney animated classic, in class. And when the Beast turns back into the prince or whatever, and he turns around, he's sort of floating in midair and his shirt's all ripped up and it's hanging off of his shoulder. And he turns around and he's got those piercing blue eyes and he's looking through his blonde hair, and all the girls in the class are squirming around. And I was just like, there's something to this that I'm probably not supposed to feel. But that was sort of my first inclination that, there was something going on. I didn't know what to call it, but I also knew that I was for sure not allowed to talk about it. So at the same time, I have that going on. And then I'm in church hearing him talking about this in this way that made it clear to me that I was in big trouble. Because how do you do the, do this and get that? How do you live by that rule? And you're going along in church and you're like, I'm good. I've got this. I believe in Jesus. He talks to me. He walks with me, the whole thing. But this man is saying, if you do this, then you go straight to hell. It's like a one-way ticket. No questions asked. God turns his back. You're done. That's the moment in church, the big moment where you're just like, all right, how do I compartmentalize all this? How do I have both? And gay people we're already tuned into our feelings a little deeper because we have to be with them by ourselves so much. We can't talk about them with people, or we couldn't then as kids. And so you're already in your emotions in such a way that you're feeling it a little bit deeper. And so whenever you're in church and you're wanting to do such a good job to get your spot next to Jesus up there, it really makes that hard whenever you've thrown in this whole other piece of struggle that you didn't ask to receive, Yeah.
It's like I feel like that's the kind of thing you just feel throughout like every bone of your body when you're feeling like that much and when it's that personal.
Because the way it was painted for me by this preacher was very simple. You pray, you ask for forgiveness, and you ask God to take things off of your heart and your spirit that aren't supposed to be there. And so for me, that in a way only amplified the gay thing that I was going through by myself, because it's not that it made it go away. It didn't do that. It made it a focus for me, because I mean, I was a prayer warrior. I was, by the time sixth grade rolled around, I was the president of the Christian club at school.
Wow.
And so, and all of that, I feel like must have come about because I was so sure that this is something that God was going to fix. And if I was the best Christian around, like if I was the kid that even the other kids at school looked to be the Christian, like I was the model of that, then for sure he was going to come to my aid,
Yeah. How long did you walk down that road, sort of praying that things would change?
Sixth grade was really the time. That was when I was like, I was desperate for God to deliver me out of this. And my bedroom, I just remember it. It was like when I closed the door, it's like I would get in my spaceship and I would go to the vacuum of space where I was safe. And I would just sit in my floor with the lights off, and I would crouch down and bury my head against my knees, and I would just rock, and I would just focus on this thing and just please God, please God, please God, please God. And most of the time I felt like I was alone, that he wasn't coming to help me here. But I never got angry. I just felt like that meant I had to do it more and more, and with more intensity and intention. I was always in conversation with God because I was the president of the Christian club. And when you're the president of the Christian club, you've got like this telephone on your desk that calls him, And so it was that made it frustrating for me that this huge thing that was going to be my ticket straight to hell. And I loved God so much, I wanted to be the best for God. And he was leaving me there on the floor. And then, I guess one day while I was down there, in my spaceship in space, he showed up and he just said, this is how I made you. I gave you this struggle, and it is a struggle, and it's going to be a struggle, but I gave it to you because you're the one that I wanted to have it. And I want you to be a light. And so get up. This is who you are. It was very much like a period to the end of all of that. Like I didn't need to dig any deeper for it. It's not that I then looked in the mirror and was like, I'm gay, and out we walked, and the sun and the rainbows started popping out. Right. But when it came to how me and God were, it wasn't an issue anymore, because God, for me, I had always had this sort of private conversation with.
Yeah.
And I never, whenever the preacher took God away from me in church, I had to figure out a different way to get to him. And it wasn't until I was a fully realized adult and did a lot of soul searching and digging a lot and going a lot further into my faith and my spirituality and learning that God is me and I am God and all those things, that I finally realized that it is not a terrible thing that those people that need church and find comfort in church and the community of church, and their spirituality is rooted in that. That's great for them. I don't hold any bitterness now, but I don't need that, because that's not where God and I found one another.
Yeah. And thank you for admitting that, because I think there is this bitterness that just comes with the territory of being an outsider, of coming out, and
But you're forced out.
Right. Yeah. Not being part of the system because of who you are. And I don't always hear people talk about that.
I think it's okay, because if we don't start by admitting it for what it is, then it's never going to change.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there is this righteousness that churches have, and it's such a contradiction to what they say that they want to be. And so I had to get the hell out of there.
Yeah. And that's the healthy thing to do. And it's better it's the challenge of, there's that challenge of having to wrestle with faith on your own, but then there's the reward of coming to the other side of it and knowing what your relationship with God is, that's so deeply personal to you, that isn't just what you were being fed at church, what you were being told to feel necessarily.
Yeah. And when you, when you have to go out and get your faith on your own, that's why I relate so closely to the story of Jesus going out before he was crucified, and going out into the wilderness, because that's what he was doing. He was going out there to find his faith and making sure that he had it before he was about to do this thing. And I will say that now, having come all this way, I can go into a church and I can meditate. One of my favorite things that I used to sing in this African-American church in my little town, it was Mount Ariat Baptist Church, and my baseball coach, Basie Fuller, he would ask me to come sing. And that's where I really figured out how the Spirit can move, right? And a thing that is said a lot in African-American churches and in a lot of their music is meditate on Him. They say that a lot. And that's what I do when I have to go to a church for something, that's like a pivotal moment in someone's life, or I still get asked to sing for funerals. That's the biggest compliment any singer could ever receive, as far as I'm concerned, is to be asked to sing someone to heaven, right? I am able to go there without any kind of hesitation. And because I stand in my faith with this assurance, I don't need anything from those people. I don't need their approval. It's a blessing for me to be there, and it's a blessing for them to have me there. And that's the way I look at it. I'm not going in there to try to change their mind, because that's not my job. Yeah. And So when I go, I can go with a completely open heart and see what happens. I don't have to go anymore and sit sold up in the back because I know this is all a sham. That I don't feel that way about it anymore.
Well, and I bet that's why they want you singing at these funerals. I mean, because you mentioned performance earlier, but that what you just described is absolutely the opposite of performance. At least from what I've heard in religious spaces, when we talk about getting on the altar and making sure that what you're doing, whether you're reading scripture or singing a psalm or something, making sure that's not a performance, but that you're doing it for God, that you're doing it for in this case of, in the case of a funeral, for this person, their soul being lifted to heaven. I mean, I know that feeling, having sung in church before myself. Like, there's just a feeling when you get kind of just locked into it, and it's less about the notes and less about getting everything exactly right, but where you're just so emotionally just checked in to that moment, where it just pours out of you.
Especially if you and everyone in the room and God, if we all know that of all the things, that he hands out as gifts, that's my gift. I'm sure there are people that are sitting out there when I sing in church that probably don't receive that gift because they're too hung up on the other thing. But there again, that's for them to reconcile, not me. The way I like to say it is that God is putting me in front of them to give them an opportunity to open their heart and to see if they'll meet that challenge.
Coming out when you got to college, what was what drove that moment for you, to speaking that truth for yourself?
Well, I'd come out to myself as a kid, but I wasn't out to anyone else until high school. I had two best friends that kept my secret, and it allowed me to really survive that whole time. I was fortunately, I wasn't ever depressed enough about anything to be suicidal or anything like that, but telling that lie all the time or living as that lie was really that was stressful for me, and it was a big thing to carry. So to have my two friends, we could talk about it, we could joke about it, we could talk about who we liked and all of those things. That was pivotal for me. And then in college, I started to come out to my close friends one at a time over time, and everybody was so good and respectful. Like, no, they didn't tell each other. They waited and let me be the one. But the Cody's gay thing followed me around always, just because I was the singer in town. And anytime you're a boy associated with anything artistic, well, you're automatically gay. And if only that was really the truth. Think of all the people I could date. But anyway, so it just followed me around because I was a singer. And unfortunately, when I was in college, there was a guy from my hometown who went to the same college as I did. And somebody from my hometown told me, and maybe they were lying, I don't know, but I got wind that he had told his mother, who was like a small town beautician, like she had her own little beauty shop in town, that I had a boyfriend in school at college, even though I had never had a boyfriend. That was completely a lie. It was a version of my truth, but nobody knew that. I wasn't out to anyone but a couple of close friends. And so when I found out that he had told his mother that, and his mother being a beautician and us all knowing what beauticians are, they're switchboard operators in small towns. I panicked. I knew that I could not allow my parents to hear that from a rumor mill in town. It just wasn't something I was willing to do. I respected and loved them too much. Mm-hmm. And so then it fast tracked that. I had to tell my mother so that she knew if she heard it in town that she could keep her back straight and handle it however she chose, but it wouldn't be because it was news, right? And so she met me in the Sonic parking lot, and I told her how, it was hard. We got through it together, but she said the thing that made her emotional about it was that to find out that her one job as a mother was to protect me as much as she could when I was in her charge as a child, and to know that I had dealt with something alone all those years in my bedroom, it really crushed her. And she had a hard time, and in that moment, I think she said so. She had a hard time getting over that, and so I thought maybe we were going to have this great little end of that episode, and the credits were going to roll, and a couple of episodes later, maybe a couple seasons later, we would get to my dad.
Yeah.
And she said, that your father and I don't keep secrets, and he knows that you asked to meet me here to tell me something, so we have to go home right now and tell him.
Oh my gosh.
And that was not in the script.
That was not the plan.
And so we had a 2-day summit on the porch. I've never actually asked him what he thought we were going to talk about. But when the hammer came down and I said it, actually my mom said it because I wouldn't say it. Mm-hmm. And he got frustrated and was like, "What is it?" And she said, "Cody's trying to tell us that he's homosexual." It was like when you see on a nature documentary, like a bear pulling his head out of a beehive, and the bees are like swarming his face, and he's stunned, and he's sort of swatting at his snout. It was kind of like that. My dad was just so shocked, and I was like, I'm still baffled and bamboozled that these people grew up with me, being me, loving Sister Act 1 and 2. And that they just were bamboozled by this. But it was a 2-day summit on the porch. He would not talk about it in the house. My younger brother was not allowed to participate in this family discussion. And for some reason, it has to be God, I walked into that with this on my mind, and it took you 18 years to go through all of the different emotions and to go through all the layers of coming to grips with this thing. Do not walk in here and expect anything short of 18 years from these two people, because it's just not fair if you do that. And so I sat there and received whatever came at me, and a lot of things were fired off. I watched my dad go. In over 2 days, I watched as these emotions, these waves of things, of anger and of sadness, of embarrassment, of disbelief, all the things that you go through in the human experience, especially figuring this thing out. I watched him do, and I listened to him. And some of the things he said were terrifying, were dangerous. were violent. And some of the things were desperate. Like at one point he said, I know that you never really were interested in going with me to hunt and fish and to be a cowboy, because we were like rodeo people, and you weren't interested in that, and you didn't take to football and all of those things, and you liked to hang out with your mom and do those things, but that doesn't make you gay. And I said, no, it doesn't. Though you're right. Those don't make me gay. I said, the fact that I've always wished that if I could cut off my arm and hand it to you, and in exchange, you could give me the ability to fall in love and to have a family the way that you fell in love and the way that you have this relationship with my mother sitting there. If I thought I could have that, I would cut this arm off right now, because I really do just want that, but it's not in the cards for me. And that's what makes me gay. But we left that. I was going back to college. It was kind of perfect timing because it allowed everybody their space.
Oof.
And I left and went back to school. And there was it was about a 3-year time of I came around for holidays and family functions, and I talked to my mom a lot, but the relationship with my dad was strained, and he had grown up without the presence of a dad. And so I think one of the ways that he learned for himself how he felt like he was there as a father was to be financially supportive of his children. He wasn't going to let them starve, and as they grew up and became independent, he wanted us to know that he was still there if we needed. And so when I would come home for this or that, him saying I love you had dried up completely. That was off the table. But he would say he would sort of catch me to the side and say, I may not have this the next time I see you. And he would hand me some money, or he would say, here's some gas money, put this in your pocket. And that's how, and I knew without having to ask for an explanation, that was his way of being there as my dad when he couldn't be there as my father. Right.
Yeah.
And so, over time, honestly, it was me being a singer and a performer in and around Little Rock, Arkansas, and my dad coming to those things. He's watched as throngs of people would show up for my shows, and there would be a line out the door, and it was all walks of life, and nobody gave a rip. In fact, it helped sell the show because I was up there, with hips and legs and all these things. And I was very much feeling myself. I was the Beyonce of my own Destiny's Children. Yes. And he just had to accept by seeing it for himself that these people adored me and they loved what I was doing. And the gay thing didn't matter. And it would take a little bit of whiskey, but he started to say, I love you. He started to hug me again. And then when I, introduced my first boyfriend, we've gotten there, now, there's still some little tiny kinks, but not anything that matters to me. We are a very close, tight-knit family rooted in love. And we don't have to talk about the gay stuff, but that's more just me being respectful,
Did that dynamic, while you were coming out to your family, did that rock your faith at all? Or were you still feeling like you had this?
It never rocked my faith because I got to the faith first. Like once I was old enough to take care of myself, I've always worked. And so at that point, I was just presenting my truth and laying it at their feet. And it was up to them to pick it up. And if they didn't, I would have been heartbroken, but I wouldn't have been, destitute. I had my bases covered. I didn't need anything from them for my faith because, like I said before, I got that just between me and God.
Going into college and afterwards, did music become your church?
It did. And I've never quite looked at it that way, but for that time, college and after, so like let's say college through my 20s, music was for sure my church. And I could always commune with God that way. The next phase of evolution for me in my faith was I went out into the ethos and started to learn about the ego and how that isn't God, right? And so now I'm in like in my master's study of faith and learning about manifesting things and the universe and God's activity in me as an equal player in that, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. I don't know how else to say it without sounding like a witch.
What were you reading at the time? Like, what was kind of guiding you?
Oh, well, it was like it honestly, it was happening to me. Like I was, I was married for just a hot little second. I was with a guy for 5.5, almost 6 years. We got married in our kitchen, just like with someone ordained, and my neighbor was the witness and all of that. And we were planning this big, party in the spring. And after we got married, a few months later, he just really decided that actually wasn't anything that he wanted, that he really pivoted on all levels, physically, spiritually, mentally, all of that. And he wanted to be free of me and our life and our marriage. And it was then, because I'm not a creature of change, or that's not my natural tendency to just be like, oh yeah, let's move that lamp that I put there that I intended to stay there for the next 200 years. Change for me as a Taurus is hard. And all of a sudden I was forced to change everything, every single fiber of my life was forced to change. And going back to that kid who was like, okay, if I do this, I get that. When I said the vows and made the promise, it didn't matter how terrible it got. That was going to be the rest of my life. And so, when it was sort of taken away by the other person, I never anticipated that or made plans for that. And so, just like when I was a child, instead of turning and running away from God in the moment of like test, I ran into God. I didn't mean to. I don't want to come across like I knew better than everybody else. I didn't. I just fell into God. And so all of these things started to happen for me and to me God kept presenting me with people who were on the mindfulness and spiritual awakening. I look at that like the levels of Mario Brothers. So like if you're at the first level and going up through there, who knows which one I'm on, but I was constantly being introduced and put in front of and crossing paths with people who were somewhere in the Super Mario Brother world of awakening to this higher sense of self. And so even to the person who came into my life that I'm now I mean I'm dating, but I feel like it's such a I wish there was a word between dating and married that meant something, you know, but there's not. We have such a deep spiritual kind of love that I wouldn't have been able to receive had I not met these other people. The only thing right now that is wearing me out is the election. Because of, I really do feel like we are at a paradigm shift as a society, and we have to do the right thing here. And there's no gray area for me. So that's where I struggle day to day, not with my faith, but in God, but with my faith in people. And I'm to the point now where I just have to pray that there are more of us than there are of them, that want this better version of ourselves to work instead of these old institutions that clearly do not.
Yeah.
If that will happen for us all, I can get back to my bliss.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, we are so polarized right now. And, yeah, what you were saying a moment ago, just talking about Jesus, made me think of your song Crimes. That was the image that came to mind as I was listening to it recently, was just the idea of Jesus before he's crucified being charged with all these crimes. And I guess I'm curious as to your thoughts, like, how do you feel like we're called as like LGBT folks to witness to who we are in these polarizing times, to be that, to kind of stand up and say, this is who we are, against people who don't agree with us, or don't agree with who we are. I mean, do you feel like that's something you were trying to do with that song? Do you feel like that's something you're trying to do with your work right now?
Yeah. So I wrote that song in very quick order, just fast on a flight. And I really do think, I wish I could go back in time and know for sure, but I think what happened, there were these two women that got beat up on a train, I think in Europe, maybe in England, but they got beat up on a train because they were lesbian. They were like together or whatever, and they were lesbians. And I knew I had been dodging the responsibility as an artist and as a songwriter and as a very self-aware and fully realized gay person. I had been dodging the responsibility of standing up because I'm not like, I don't get down with the rainbow flag. I don't wear the stuff. I don't, I will go to a gay bar and I love drag queens. I love the art of drag. I will go dance my face off, but I'm not immersed in the gay, the scene of it all, despite, myself, I'm just a country boy that likes to be out in the yard and I'm more like an 80-year-old woman. I just like to be in my flower beds, canning vegetables, like I like to be in my space. But anyway, when that happened, it just sort of all came rushing back to me and I'd always wanted to try to figure out a way to tell my story that didn't take an hour and a half like it is now. Right. So I needed to do it in 3 minutes, and it never felt authentic. It never felt like that was enough time. And I was just doing the story a disservice to even try. But when it just hit me, like, I've been a crime against myself since as far back as I go. And it just started to flow. But it was also, at the time, I was also writing it for Black people. And I was also writing it for any group that's marginalized, for, like for the Jewish community, for whoever, as a group, from the time that we've started stepping out, were a crime to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the point of the song is that in all of this, as far back as we can go, we've always been brutalized and killed and whatever have you, violently treated. But still, we survive as a group. And so that's why the last line of the song is, better make it stick.
Yeah.
Because if you want to eradicate us, but the problem is, it's not a choice that we make. So as long as babies are being born, there's going to be more gay people. And when the people that reach out to me the most about crimes are the older generations who say things like, you have so eloquently summed up my entire experience in such a way that makes me feel like I can stand up a little straighter.
Yeah.
And that song, I feel like I didn't write. I feel like it wrote me, it just was so easy to say when I finally knew how to say it. And it took the image of those two women just sort of sitting on a train being themselves. They were just sort of in their own little bubble. And even that was a crime to somebody.
I've been a crime against myself since as far back as I go. Preacher man, he slammed his fist 'cause the Bible told him so. Carry yourself to the front of the line, get ready for the altar call. Tack your sins to the side of him, 'cause he can fix them all. Lock me up if what I've got's too much for you to take. Tie my hands to the back of my head and see what you can break. 'Cause I'm just a lamb in the lion's mouth, and he's got a bone to pick. And if you're putting me out of my misery, go ahead and make it quick.
How is songwriting for you? Is it often a sort of divine experience like that, where it just kind of comes to you?
It is when I allow it to be. I do have instances in my catalog, if you will, where I will work on a song for months and months. I will say, though, I have a tendency to speak about God in my songwriting. I can hear one side of the argument saying, well, that doesn't matter. But the other side of that, as sort of an artist who has to be aware of what they write and the content and all of that, I don't want to be redundant, and I don't want to lean on that too hard. And I have found that right now, really trying to figure out, do I just go with it, or do I try to write it in a different way? And I don't think either is good or bad. I just think I don't want it to get redundant and boring,
Sure.
So some songs take a long, long time, and I have learned to not panic about that. If it's something that I can't stop thinking about, if it's a song, if it's a hook or one line that I just can't stop thinking about, then I know that that's a puzzle I need to solve, and I'll work on it until it's solved. And those are really the ones that are the most fun to me, that when I finally crack one open and it finishes itself, there's such a euphoria. It's almost like a drug, that only people that write can understand.
We are just about out of time. Before we wrap up, what hopes do you have for this new album, and just for what's ahead of you right now?
Well, when God answered me as a child and said, I made you this way, you're meant to be a light, you are a light, now go out there and shine it, all those things. I never let go of that. It really is the guiding principle of my life. I love to be, catty with my friends, and I love gossip and all those things, just like the next person. But outwardly, and as a human interacting with other humans, it is for sure my job to be the embodiment of a smile and an extension of love, which is all God is made of. That's the secret. That's the whole point. And in everything that I do, I really have to do it with the intention of someone feeling and receiving love. Because from that, I think that you get to the bigger, harder ones, like forgiveness and acceptance. Mm-hmm. And so when people who might not on the surface forgive me or accept me, if I lead with love and gratitude and a happy thought and a happy gesture of kindness, that is the miracle that will allow them to soften the edges of whatever they're feeling. Universally, I feel for sure that whatever you put out as your contribution to the space around you is exactly the thing that you will get back. And so I have to sing and write and perform music and content that has this undercurrent of sharing in the human experience and being a brother to everyone. Mm-hmm. So that even if they're just in the space of a 3-minute song and they're in their ear pods or they're in their car or whatever it is, that when they're with me, that's what they get. And outside of that, I'm not really interested in the rest, because I think that we don't have time to focus on anything but the loving part.
It's been an absolute pleasure getting to hear your story. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show, Cody.
I just think that you are doing God's work, and I applaud you, and I'm so humbled and proud at the same time to get to have been a part of it. So thank you so much.
Lock me up if what I've got's too much for you to take. Tie my hands to the back of my head, see what you can bring.
If you'd like to learn more about Cody, you can find his music at codybelew.com and give him a follow over on social media. We've got all the links in the show notes. I'm your host, Greg Thompson. Our editor is Cariad Harmon, and our theme music is by JP Ruggieri. And we are proudly recording from my apartment here in Nashville, Tennessee. And we are grateful to our latest Patreon supporter, David Hall, for becoming a member of the show over on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/outloudstories to learn more. And if you haven't already, please be sure to leave us a rating or a review over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, hit that subscribe button so you get the latest episodes right when they drop. And for more inspiration and behind-the-scenes looks at our show, be sure to find us on social media at Outloud Stories, and sign up for our email newsletter too while you're at it. You'll find all those links I just mentioned in the show notes. Remember, friends, queer people have faith lives too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. We'll be back next month with a new episode. Thanks for listening.
Said if you put me out of my misery, well, you better make it stick.